Hi, thanks Taylor. And yes, you just forgot to mention that I'm actually teaching at what is definitely one of the best courses in the world, the Conference Interpreting Techniques course. The things I have to say to keep a job. Now, I work as a freelance conference interpreter. That's my main source of income. But I've also done quite a lot of different type of interpreting. I've done some telephone interpreting, some public service interpreting, not a lot. So I'm going to talk to you about the forms of interpreting, and I'll also talk about their challenges and the joys. There are quite a few joys as well, don't worry about it. I thought I wasn't going to come up with any joy, but there are. Now, I want to start with simultaneous. I'm sure you've all seen the film, or most of you have seen the film with Nicole Kidman, the interpreter. So basically you sit in a booth, put your headset on, and you just start translating almost immediately. Actually, I should say interpreting almost immediately. And it's probably one of the scariest form of interpreting, because you just haven't got time to go back and sort of, patch up your mistakes. You also work with another colleague, so you take turns, because it is quite stressful, and it does require a lot of concentration. And it's the form of interpreting that is mainly used in international conferences. So when you have obviously more than one language, you have about 4, 5, 6 languages. So it's used for large conferences, like this one. You might end up having the Italian interpreting booth and the French, German, and what have you. And I'll try and talk about the challenges and joys towards the end, but I will mention some of them as I go along. After all, I'm Italian. It's very difficult to talk in a very structured manner. I hope you understand that. So that is simultaneous. And the other type of form of interpreting that is still taught, it's not used an awful lot, but it is I think it is very important to know, and very important to use as well, to be able to use properly, is consecutive interpreting, which basically entails taking notes when someone is speaking and then delivering the same speech, more or less, into another language. Obviously, you have more time there to sort of prepare your speech, and you can change a few things. You can even ask, if you haven't understood something, you can go back and ask your speaker what he or she meant by that particular sentence, or whether they said 50 as in 50 or 15 as in 15, which is absolutely a nightmare for those who work from English. Try and get these kind of nuances right. Consecutive interpreting is no longer used as it was in the good old days, probably in the 70s, when there were not many interpreting booths were actually being used, so the simultaneous wasn't very common. So you would actually spend the whole day translating backwards and forwards, taking down notes, delivering the speech, and so on and so forth with another colleague. These days, it's mainly used, or at least I use it for after dinner speeches. Obviously, you have to make sure that you haven't drunk a lot. And also, I use it for very short press conferences, for about half an hour. So you have a speaker speak, in my case in Italian, I deliver the whole lot in English, and then you have the questions, mainly in English. So I translate those back, taking down notes into Italian for my speaker or my speakers. And obviously I work on my own, so it's cheaper for the client. It's usually very short, because it is extremely tiring. So, or as I said, after dinner speeches, or before dinner speeches. So that's when consecutive is actually used. However, having said that, we also use it for public service interpreting, and a little bit for telephone interpreting as well, and because you do need to make notes sometimes, but I'll come to that in a minute. So that's our consecutive. Now, the other form of interpreting, which I should have mentioned earlier on, is the chuchotage, or whispering, which is a form of simultaneous. It is a simultaneous interpreting. You're just sitting behind or next to your speakers, and you are whispering the interpreter into their ears. So you realize this is kind of nice and cozy. It's kind of one-to-one meetings, or I've done it for sort of 10 people, but it's a nightmare. That's, you know, as far as it goes, because, you know, you are talking at the same time as someone is speaking. You're covering your voice is covering the input, so it does require an awful lot of concentration, even more than simultaneous probably. But again, it's used in. I use it mainly in politics. You find that you know, at political level, you got the two ministers, you know, meeting, and they meet in the office, and you just haven't got time to do it with proper consecutive. It takes a long time, so off you go with the chuchotage. But you still have your notepad with you, and you take down some notes sometimes, because you do need that to remember names or figures or stuff like that. Moving on, the other form of interpreting I want to talk to you about is the public service interpreting. I haven't done an awful lot of that, but I have worked in courts, and I've done a little bit of medical stuff, and I'm not going to tell you about that, but it was very awkward for the poor lady who couldn't find a female interpreter. So we ended up going to a gynecologist together, and it was, you know, most unusual for me, but hey, I got a mortgage to pay. And basically, I think it's a form of interpreting where you do need to use a little bit of consecutive, you do a bit of chuchotage, you obviously don't do any simultaneous at all, and it's mainly used in, depending on the languages, in immigration services or in court, in a magistrate court, and in hospital. So I think it's absolutely scary, because you have to know your stuff there. You've got to know what you're talking about. You know, you just can't walk into a hospital not knowing, you know, your medical terms and being aware of what can come at you. Anyway, so that is public service interpreting, because obviously public service, you're offering a service to the public. Having said that, I treat interpreting as a service. I provide a service. I think that's quite important for me. And it's also, that's where I derive a source of my job satisfaction. When I know I've provided good service, which happens once in a while, but it does happen, I can assure you, then it just makes me feel very pleased with myself, very happy. The other two forms of interpreting I want to mention are the liaison ad hoc business, which basically ties in with the public services interpreting, and, you know, use it kind of in a business context. You know, I think again it's a little bit of a mixture of a chuchotage and taking down notes. You know, it's a business meeting. You got two managing directors or two CEOs of, you know, two companies, one from Italy, one from the UK, and obviously these people haven't got much time. They don't have much time for your consecutive. It's got to be very, very fast. You've got to be there, and, you know, you do chuchotage and a little bit of note taking. You can use that, you know, when you go. You might want to do, well, you know, you might not want to do actually. You might be asked to interpret at the sort of guided tour of some factory. I remember going to the Westland Augusta helicopter factory, you know, so that you have someone actually explaining what goes on. So that is the ad hoc liaison business interpreting. So it's a mixture of chuchotage, consecutive, without really taking an awful lot of notes, although I still have my notepad. Yeah, do you remember that Linus, you know, that Charles Schulz character? Always had a blanket, always carry a notepad with me, you know, it's like, it's here, it just kind of reassures me. And the final form of interpreting, as far as I'm aware, unless, you know, there are some new ones I haven't discovered yet, is telephone interpreting. And that seems to be expanding these days because of a number of issues, mainly financial and time as well. So what you do there, you are at home, you know, there are companies specializing in providing telephone interpreting. So you sit at home, you call this phone number, you log on, and they know you are available for interpreting. And, you know, you got your headset on, and then, you know, you actually interpret a telephone conversation between two people. And obviously that is a problem, because you don't see the people. So that, which actually does help when you're interpreting, you see the people. It really helps you focus, and it really helps you understanding greatly. I mean, for all those who wear glasses, I don't know about you, but if I take off my glasses, for some reason I hear less, and my hearing becomes impaired. I got to see that. Yeah, I got to see what goes on. So that's quite tricky. I've done it not quite like that. I've done it in sort of, again, very high political level. And again, it's quite scary as well, because you really have to focus. And it's quite easy when you're at home to actually feel very, very relaxed. I remember doing some very, very high level stuff at 10 o'clock in the evening wearing my pajamas. And, they never found out, the two guys, that I was so relaxed. But you have to be careful, because, you are working from home, and that can be, you can lose your concentration quite easily. So you've got to make sure that there is no noise around you. You turn off your mobile phones, little things like that, so you're not disturbed. Now, so these are the main forms of interpreting, and it's up to you then what you are going to specialize in, but obviously they all entail the transfer of information from one language to another in a very, very short time. You've got to be quick. And I think that is one of the challenges. You've got to be fast. You have to be very fast at analyzing what is being said and synthesizing that, so that, your output is, obviously has to be almost immediate. So it does require some mental agility. And so again, and in order to do that, you have to stay focused. And I think staying focused is probably the greatest challenge of this job, because there's so many things that can actually impair your focus. You could be interpreting. I mean, it's happened to me in November. It happened to me in November. There I was, sitting next to my speaker, and it was about, blah blah blah. So off I start, and we're in this huge, the Excel exhibition center, huge exhibition, the World Travel Market. And at one point, I think it must have been some Russian band. They started playing mad, and I just couldn't hear anymore, and they couldn't hear me. It was really, and I kind of lost it for a few seconds. And but it might be simple things like the guy you're working with in your booth, sneezes, and your speaker is actually saying the verb of that sentence, and you don't hear the verb, and your sentence goes like that. So again, you got to be pretty fast to actually make up some nice list of stories, and I have made up a few stories in my days, and but not many though, I can assure you. And but yeah, you have to still come across as confident, as if you know what you're talking about, because your clients are paying you for a job and they have to trust you. I think that is quite important. So my nerves don't really matter to a client. What matters is actually my output, and I provide a good service. So staying focused is, as I said, is very, very important indeed, as is preparing. Now, I know you've seen me this, not very professional pieces of paper, but I've actually prepared for this conference, which lecture or presentation rather, and I hope you are, understanding something. Maybe I'm deluding myself, but you've got to be preparing. I've read it about 55 times, and I was preparing for it. And you have to prepare for a conference, a meeting. You have to know the subject matter. You ask for papers, documents, anything that can help you. Obviously, don't overload yourself, because sometimes you end up in a one-day job and they send you that much stuff to read, and you have to be quite discriminating as to what you're going to read. But you just have a look at the agenda, see who's going to talk, what the subject matters are, do a search on the net. What is this company doing? What is that other company doing? You find all sorts of information on the net. So prepare. That's very important. And even if you are prepared, very often, as is my case, probably very special, but you actually walk into a booth and you just, you don't know what the hell they're going to talk about, because, there's for confidential reasons, you don't know what they're talking about. So you've got to be there and be extra focused for this sort of thing. So like yesterday, 9:30, a colleague calls me and she said, "Paulo, I'm not feeling well at all. Can you go replace me?" Sure. So off I went, and I didn't even know what these people were doing. It turned out it was some kind of institute teaching fashion design. So, you do these things because because you do them. and you have to be prepared for that. So again, you have to stay focused. And I always use the tennis ball as the analogy. So like the tennis player has to concentrate on the ball. It doesn't matter what the journalists say about him or her. It doesn't matter what the other opponent is doing, or what he's saying rather. What he's doing is important. But it is the tennis ball that's coming at you that you have to stay focused on. And for us, the tennis ball is the words. So the more focused we are on the actual words, the better it is and the better our job. It's a job, you need to stay up to date, you need to know your current affairs, you need to know what goes on in the world, so I'm following Mr. Berlusconi like a hawk these days. I find it fascinating what he's doing. Because you never know what people might make a reference to the Noemi Gate, as they call it in Italy. So it's good to just go through the online newspapers in the morning very, very briefly, just to get an idea of what goes on in the world. And obviously, if you're doing a conference on climate change, it's just good to keep up to date and see what the latest things on climate change are, which could be, the latest conference or the latest book or what have you. And even if you are that, if you do that updating, sometimes, another challenge is the culture. I mean, if I work with American people, I hardly know anything about US culture, American culture, and that is tricky. I've lived in this country long enough to know quite a bit, and even then, if I wasn't brought up here, so I did not, watch English TV when I was brought up. If somebody makes reference to some character that they used to watch, on TV when they were 5 or 6, I go like, Or, if you talk to me about cricket, if you use cricket as a metaphor, I just don't understand anything. And I remember this guy talking about, his time in the Marines, and I'm, good for him, but God, it was difficult because, some of the expressions, stuff like that, and, if you can educate your speakers, but it's easier said than done. I don't think in most cases, you can't really talk to your speakers and ask them to remember that they're talking to an international audience, and therefore, talking about the cricket doesn't quite wash with Italian, which is a footballing country. So you have to be, you have to be prepared for these sort of things. It's a job that requires flexibility. I mean, I had to drop everything yesterday. Of course, you do it for money, which is great, but I just had to rearrange all sorts of things, and actually I worked until about 2 o'clock in the morning. And you do that because sometimes you got your peak rush hour, the rush day. So May and June are very busy months. So you've got to have that kind of flexibility to take on extra work if you want to, obviously, and be prepared also to adapt to the client's needs as well and requirements. So you might end up, having to work an extra half hour, an extra hour. So, you've got to be aware of that to a point, though, because we're not doormats. So again, it's very important to have your professional boundaries around you, which you create, with contracts and proper negotiating and all that. But that is another story. Now, for public service interpreting, I noticed it's very important to have good professional and emotional boundaries as well, because it's very easy to get involved. I mean, this poor lady, she had some kind of problems, endometriosis, I think. And, it's very easy to get involved. I really felt for this lady. But, over the months, because this went on for quite a while, she was kind of gradually sort of trying to pull down my professional and emotional barriers, and like asking for discounts. I said, why do you ask me for discounts? When the guy, actually, your gynecologist actually works in Harley Street, and I've seen you taking out your American Express and paying him an awful lot of money. So, but because, we were kind of on first name terms after a while, it's very difficult to resist that. But you have to remember that you are not advocates, for the guy who's actually been interviewed by the immigration officers. Not at all. In fact, these guys sometimes can be pretty good liars, and you might end up believing the really sad story when in fact it's lies. So try and keep away from that. Don't get involved. It's very, very difficult. But you're there to actually interpret for them and make sure that the communication flows properly. So So, the speed, this is a final challenge, I think. Yes, the speed can be quite a problem. So if someone like me speaks very fast, you're going to have a problem interpreting that person, and that's where you have to be very quick at analyzing and synthesizing. So you have to really sort of get rid of the of what is not essential in what I'm saying, and actually see what is important and essential, and interpret that. So it's a bit like, what's it called? White water rafting or something like that. You know, you got to like that, and you're constantly doing that, you know, if you have someone who speaks very fast. Now, joys, and then will be the conclusion. There is one page of joys, so it's not just suffering and challenges. I like that, challenges. What a nice euphemism. Now, I think the main joy for me is actually when I feel useful. So, which is a little bit different when you do simultaneous, because you don't know who you're talking about. You have got such a large audience that you just don't know who you're talking about, so very often, in fact. But if, you know, on a one-to-one situation, that's great. I really feel useful. I feel I've provided a service, and provided I haven't said, you know, a lot of sort of not interesting things to them because I haven't understood something. But I think that is the joy, actually. That I've given a good service. Communication has flown. They've understood each other, and great. And if they say thank you to me, that's even better. If not, I take it that everything was fine. I don't expect to be, you know, complimented or thanked or whatever. As long as they don't complain, then I'm fine. You also get a high. I mean, this is a very personal thing, you know, but when you're interpreting, you know, and you are on a good day and you're just there being able to follow what is being said and rendering that into Italian is great. You get a personal high. You feel like, I don't know what you feel like, but it makes me feel quite good. It's a job that has flexibility, so I don't work every day, and that is nice. I like that. I don't like my 9 to 5 routines for too long. So I enjoy that sense of flexibility that I get. Some people don't particularly like it, but I enjoy it. I know my female colleagues, you know, they got a family, or even male colleagues, they got a family, they got time to take their kids to school. You know, there's a lot of nice things about this working freelance in general, anyway, not just being an interpreter. Something very nice is the sometimes the people you're working with, you know, that can be a real challenge, because if you're working for somebody who's quite famous, it can be intimidating. And if you're working for someone, you know, chemistry is chemistry. Sometimes you just don't like the person. I don't like Berlusconi, but there you go. I have worked for him, and you know, you just have to be professional about it and just get on with it. You know, again, you focus on the words. It doesn't matter, but you have to be careful to manage that chemistry thing. And sometimes you work with colleagues that you really, really like, so that's great. You actually joy of interpreting. Sometimes colleagues you don't like very much, you know, but you have to be able to handle that. The other thing is yes, I travel a little bit, not a lot, but there's been a little bit of traveling, so that's something I enjoy. And I've been to some very nice places, not a lot, because, you know, with Italian you don't travel an awful lot, but I've been to some nice places, and I usually try if I stay on for 1 or 2 days, if I can, but I will not that interfere with the professional side of things. So I'm not going there on a holiday. I'm going there to work, and if I can, I stay on, but I'm not going to let that staying on interfere with my job. So I will not negotiate, you know, particular special deals because my client is taking me on a free holidays. Not at all. I'm there to work first, and if I can, I stay on. But it's great when that happens. And I've been to a number of places, you know, where I don't think many people have been. I remember going to the top of the BT Tower. It was only for 5 seconds because I dislike heights intensely. But I got there, grabbed a glass of wine, looked around, and went straight down again. And yes, and I was taken up there by 2 people, and we did sort of in 3 stages. You know, 10 floors, 10 floors, 10 floors, because I was scared, but I wanted to go and see that. So that's great. And funny, because I was talking to a colleague the other day. So yes, it's quite nice. We've been to some, you know, nice places. I've been to Lancaster House, and yes, I've been to Downing Street as well, and Buckingham Palace. And it's interesting that. And she said, you know, Paulo, I actually interpreted in a bathroom. I said, you're joking? That's the most interesting thing. And it was a real bathroom. Basically, she ended up working in a showroom. It was a factory manufacturing tiles, and in the showroom there was one of these bathrooms, not the real ones, the one that they've set up with all the beautiful tiles. And because there was no other space, she actually ended up sitting on the loo and interpreting there with the headset. So, how strange can that be? But it's a fun little story to tell people. Two more things, and then I'm going to finish, and I'll give you some time for questions. I find, and I'm not disparaging translation at all, but with interpreting, by the end of the day, it's over and done with. I find, I do some translation work occasionally, and when it's these long translations, I always carry them with me, when I go out in the evening, I wake up in the morning with the translation. So that is something I appreciate. But hey, I had to do translation as well because I have to live. And oh yes, and this is one of the greatest joys for someone like me. I've had some really, really lovely meals. So I've been to some really nice restaurants and hotels. I love that. But I've also had some pretty bad coffee. Thank you.